Welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host and producer. My name is James McCarthy. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from the Wide Left Substack. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, I know that we scheduled today as the day to record, and we did that yesterday before any news broke. So I don't feel like we can blame it on us as to what we're going to be talking about. I feel like Twin Cities Orthopedic is the one we need to actually investigate.
Yeah, a very curious relationship that they and the Vikings have. So for people who are unfamiliar, the Vikings facility is called TCO Performance Center. TCO stands for Twin Cities Orthopedic. So they are a sponsor, but also they have a clinic on campus, that just people who need to go to an orthopedic center can just, if they're referred to by a specialist or whatever, can just go. It's for the general public. And that has occurred, that relationship has occurred alongside a very suspicious number of knee injuries in the history of the Minnesota Vikings, among, in particular, stars for the Minnesota Vikings, or starters. I struggle to argue that Sam Bradford was a star for the Vikings, but I think you get my meaning here.
Yes.
Yeah. So Adrian Peterson, not Christian Ponder. That was a compartment syndrome. Teddy Bridgewater, Sam Bradford, some rookie this year, I think. Also,
yeah, we'll talk about JJ in a moment, but welcome to this episode of Norse Code. We have plenty of things to talk about. By now, you've likely heard about what happened to JJ McCarthy, both in terms of the preseason game and his performance, and the news that has come out afterwards. So it's not all doom and gloom, but it's not good.
It's not all doom and gloom, but it's not good.
Yeah,
it's not sunny skies either.
It's not a thunderstorm, and it's not sunshine. It's kind of like when the smoke rolls in from Alberta, and you got to stay inside and just kind of deal with your feelings. It's kind of like that.
Right. Make sure that your air filters are running at any kind of ingress point to your house, that kind of stuff.
Yes, that. So we've got that. We want to go over what happened in the Raiders game because there's plenty of stuff to break down. We can do a little bit of a preview against the Browns and a mailbag as well. But before we start, again, thank you guys so much for listening to Norse Code. If you enjoy the show and would like to donate to the show, help us out financially, you can do so in a couple of different ways. You can go over to patreon.com/norsecode, and for $3.50 a month, or a little less for the year subscription, you get access to bonus materials, you get access to the Discord, all of that. Special thank you to Dylan Rogers, who signed up last episode. Thank you, Dylan, so much. And if you'd like to donate just a one-time donation is paypal.me/norsecode. Or if you'd like to be one of the cool kids who are, the summer, early fall, can be some wedding stuff going on. If you want to find the right wedding gift for your Norse Code Patreon subscriber, check out norsecode.threadless.com. That is a fine site to pick up. You know what? They almost should have a wedding registry option on there. You can get t-shirts, onesies, just in case a baby is going to happen sometime soon. Shower curtains, always a good opportunity as well for a wonderful wedding present. So check it out over at norsecode.threadless.com. I don't know anyone getting married soon, so you keep accusing me of not believing in or being angry with people who are, so I'm just trying to help out.
I don't think you're angry at people who are getting married. I think it's more that you just don't trust that the marriage will be successful.
No, just because I've never been able to make it work doesn't mean other people can't. I have that belief about
which
a lot
I think
of
is a very healthy attitude to have. I just didn't anticipate you having a healthy attitude about this.
I'm aware that I'm not a healthy person physically, psychologically. I'm familiar. Fun news. I'm not getting back surgery. I still can't go to London, but I'm not getting back surgery because of things that had nothing to do with anything I did. They just don't have
so the lack of back surgery is actually not good news.
No, it is not. My whole thing started over again. I hate this hospital so much. Yay for a town of 60,000 not having a neurosurgeon anymore. But at least I don't have to worry about being totally drugged up for the first couple of weeks of the season. If that happens naturally, that's its own fault. let's get into Hell League stuff. We got another week of Hell League registration. Everybody's getting in this year. Send it in. I've responded to most of you, but there's a couple of people in the email I haven't gotten to yet. norsecodepodcast@gmail.com if you're interested in joining the Hell League, or send a DM to me on Twitter, on Discord, whatever. Just let me know that you want in and give me your email address. I'm going to start adding people here in the next few days, probably by the beginning of next week. That should all be done, and we will get the draft situated and started. So, but that is something that is coming. So the Hell League is coming for you all if you want to sign up for it. If you're willing to attempt, if you're willing to go for it, it could be yours. And it's awful, and it's lovely, and it's perfect, and you'll never watch football the same again.
It's very stupid how it changes how you watch the game.
There was a missed kick in the Baltimore preseason game, and it was like right into my veins. I was like, yes, we're back, baby. We are back. And then the field goal block in the Vikings game, like, oh yeah. Now we're good.
Yeah, now we're cooking.
Yep. This is football's back, baby. Football's back. Let's violently segue into the news that came out today. Initially, it came out that there was going to be a Zoom press conference with Coach O'Connell, and then it came out that McCarthy, who'd been suffering from some knee soreness, apparently tore part of his meniscus and is going to require some surgery. Because this is a meniscus tear surgery, there's a wide-ranging amount of time for when he would be eligible to come back. Some people, this depending on how bad the tear is, this is something that could be fairly quick. It could be a long-standing injury. Nobody really walks the same or feels the same after their meniscus tears. I can speak from personal experience on that. So, Arif, what have we done to deserve this, and what did Luke Braun have to say?
Always a terrible pair of questions. The fact that they're combined is even worse. Okay. So, our crime was optimism, and I'm going to have to own up to this one a little bit. I suggested that it was possible for Vikings fans to be optimistic in my preseason recap piece over at Wide Left.
I own the shotgun. I own the optimism shotgun.
I didn't say I was optimistic. Let me be clear. And that was kind of the genesis of the shotgun in the comic, actually being optimistic. But I did open the door to the possibility that optimism was on the table. And for that, I apologize. So I did play a role in this. But I argue that a small Substack is not responsible for the widespread disease of optimism that struck the fan base after the Raiders game.
That is fair, I suppose, in this case.
So certainly we were infested with optimism, and I think that produced, this is kind of one of the symptoms, right, of that is this kind of, the body politic of the Vikings is lashing out. And in this case, it was with the knee injury to its rookie quarterback. So that's what happened. For those who kind of want a little bit of a timeline for kind of the way we discovered that this was an issue, I've got Kevin Seifert's piece linked in the show notes about McCarthy going through knee surgery. James outlined it pretty well. After the Raiders game, we didn't know about the injury. It sounded like the Vikings might have known about it because they suggested that he was able to or could play through it. But he did not report any soreness, I guess, to the Vikings until Monday. I'm not sure how that works, but the Vikings learned that his knee was sore. On Monday, we learned that his knee was sore and he missed practice. And so, a bunch of reporters asked about it. And the Vikings and Kevin O'Connell suggested that it probably wasn't that big of a deal, that they were just being careful. Kevin O'Connell mentioned something about how, your first preseason game, everyone's going to be a little bit sore, which of course invites the follow-up question, then why is it just this guy? Right? That's pretty fair, right? Oh, everybody? Yeah, but only one guy is missing practice, so seems like a special case. But the Vikings said they were just being smart about it, that it didn't seem serious. And then Kevin O'Connell even said specifically that it didn't seem that serious, but they wanted to get They wanted to be sure. They wanted to do their due diligence. And so they got an MRI, and the MRI reveals a tear. As Luke Braun's piece over at Wide Left points out, so he's moved beyond feet now. He is moving up the anatomical chain. He's at knees.
That's dangerous, quite frankly.
Yeah, I pray he stops there, honestly. But yeah, so he's got some knee facts for you all over at Wide Left. He's talking about kind of the four most common examples of meniscus tears. Now, I don't know if the four that he identified are common among the general population of people who suffer meniscus tears, or if that is specific to athletes, or if athletes have a different incidence rates of certain types of tears, because of course athletes are putting different loads on their knees, plus they also, especially football players, experience contact, which could probably change a lot of those things, right? So it could be a little bit different than what Braun identified in his piece, but it was pretty instructive, and he talked about kind of why a tear on the outside of the meniscus is far preferable to a tear that reaches to the inside or even starts on the inside. It has to do with blood flow, and blood flow has to do with healing. Read the piece. It's fairly well researched, in part because he basically repurposed another piece that he wrote back in like 2014 or something. I don't know. Good for him. But yeah, if you want
a glowing review, if there ever was one.
Right. Yeah. I am charging people to read this. You can head over to Why Left Out Football to read more about it. And he talks about kind of the various repairs that one can undergo. It is important to note that Kevin O'Connell did say that their primary goal is to make sure that JJ McCarthy has long-term health and stability in the knee. And so they're not going to pursue the particular treatment options with an eye towards getting him back sooner rather than later if there is a longer recovery option. And that one presents fewer risks upon return. They'll pick that one, is basically what he was suggesting. And then he added the sentence, the only things we're prioritizing right now are JJ McCarthy's health and like the success for Vikings winning games, or something like that. A more elegantly worded sentence than what I just said. And I just felt like that actually clouded things, because I assume he's talking about like the long-term capacity for the Vikings to win games, which would suggest, the long-term health of JJ McCarthy, in which case these things are aligned. But like the problem with player health as it relates to teams is that these two things are often at odds, very often. And teams have a huge incentive to return players quicker and take shortcuts or take risks in terms of long-term health to get that player back, because coaches don't get infinite latitude. You got to start winning games sooner rather than later. So for O'Connell to say we prioritize both the health and the success of the Vikings franchise, winning games, not contradictory under a certain framework, right? Long-term games, but it could be contradictory, and I feel like kind of muddies the waters. Either way, I think probably because the plan that they've had, and Alec Lewis talks about this in his piece, I'll link that as well, because the plan has kind of always been to have kind of a long-term view on McCarthy's development and to make sure that there's a way to prevent him from getting on the field in case the team panics or something like that. I'm sure they're probably going to actually take a long-term approach here, but I just want to caution people not to always trust teams when they say that. Now, Lewis's piece, I think, goes a little bit too far in some of the things it suggests, like that this is, maybe actually a good thing because it'll force him to sit. And when he's forced to sit, he'll like learn the game through kind of a different angle. And that helps Sam Darnold a lot. And it's like, okay, but like, there's a reason Sam Darnold is like on the Vikings, right? Like it certainly did not help him enough, right? like that's an issue. Lewis points out that that Darnold's 4 best games came after he came back from that injury. That strikes me as statistical noise. But like the idea that, that forced Darnold to like sit down and listen to like the backup quarterback who's now starting and pay more attention to the details and stuff like that. Like that's fine, but Darnold started like week 1. Like that's it's a different scenario. Like you're getting a guy who's getting thrown into the fire, and now you have an excuse to slow him down, right? With McCarthy, that's not the case. He's not starting week 1. He has already slowed down. He's already at the point where he's sitting on the bench, looking at the game through Sam Darnold's eyes, right? You're learning from the backup quarterbacks instead of having to get out there and execute right away and maybe take cognitive shortcuts or whatever, right? Like he doesn't have to do that anyway. And so I think the piece maybe makes its case a little bit too strongly, but X bad thing is actually secretly a good thing is a pretty good angle for sports writing. I get it. Very compelling. So yeah, but it is actually a pretty well written piece because it goes into Sam Darnold's history of like having to deal with an injury his rookie year that kept him out for a little bit. So that's worth reading. But yeah, that's like those are the 3 things related to the injury. Like check out the Luke Braun piece that goes into the details of how these injury repairs might go. Read the Kevin Seifert piece if you want to learn about kind of the timeline of how we learned about this injury, and the Alec Lewis piece if you want like good copium.
So we do have a game that we can break down a bit as well.
That's crazy. No way.
Look, I'm shocked too, and it ended up being, I say a lot better of a game than it would have suggested after the first couple of defensive snaps for the Vikings. But let's take a look at the Raiders game. Offensively, this was a game that started with Sam Darnold thrown around a bit, and I mean, I think I want to start where everybody wants us to start. The punting battle is real, but the snap, the last couple of kicks he had at the end were not good.
Yeah, for sure. No, okay, so 5 punts in the game from the Vikings, 3 from I can't believe we're talking about it this way. Thanks, James. 3 from Ryan Wright, 2 from Seth Vernon. I don't think it's a real punting battle. I disagree with you, James, because Ryan Wright has been holding all throughout camp, and Seth Vernon has not been holding at all, as far as I know, as far as people can tell. And so Seth Vernon would have to demolish Ryan Wright here. And so far, that's not happening. So Ryan Wright had 3 punts, 57-yard average on the punts. That's a gross average. The net is a 45-yard average. There was 2 returns, right? There were 2 returns, and so the returns gained some yardage. But the hang time wasn't an issue. In fact, the Vikings punting had some of the best hang time this weekend, and Ryan Wright particularly had extremely good hang time as well as good distance. Did force 1 inside the 20, which was fair caught. Excellent work. Just a good day punting for Ryan Wright. Seth Vernon had 1 good punt and 1 not so good punt. And the not so good punt, I believe, got returned for 18 yards. 50% success rate's not going to cut it, so rip, I guess.
I just thought it was amazing that he went out there. Like, just the fact that we actually did have like a punter battle in quotations. We did have 2 punters out there.
It was very exciting.
So let's actually talk about the game. Sam Darnold looked all right. Offense was
I honestly thought he looked good. Like not just all right, like good.
He looked better than he looked as good as people had been touting his preseason his camp stuff to look like. He looked about as good as they were giving him, minus the Brady comparisons that some of the faithful have been slipping out.
It was a bit much. It was a bit much.
He looked pretty good. He looked pretty good.
Yeah.
The receivers, other than Jordan Addison, looked pretty good.
I mean, Ty Chandler was like the worst receiver out of them.
Best runner, though. Who knew?
Yeah, best runner. So, you got to take the good with the bad, I guess. I'm glad we have Aaron Jones. No, so Darnold completed 4 of 8 passes, and despite a 50% completion rate, still averaged 7.4 yards per attempt, which is actually a very difficult thing to do at a 50% completion rate, which suggests that his completions were quite good. He also had 2 other accurate passes, one of which was dropped by Ty Chandler, the other of which was pass defensed in the end zone. I believe it was Jalen Naylor who's in the end zone. Jacorian Bennett knocked it out. That was an accurate pass. That's one that I would expect the receiver to generally win because it's not really the same as a 50-50 ball. the way we think of a lot of contested catches, both players have an opportunity to get access to the ball. That didn't really happen here. Jalen Naylor had exclusive access to the ball and didn't follow through. Naylor had a great game. That's one mistake that he made, but that mistake occurred when Darnold was on the field, and a lot of his great stuff, minus one of the Darnold catches, was with McCarthy on the field. So that happened. That's fine. But Darnold should have ended that drive with a touchdown based off of how well he was playing. And his yards per attempt, like once we kind of adjust for that and adjust for the fact that all quarterbacks suffer from drops, this is a really high, contested / drop rate. Even just one drop is a pretty high rate because that'd be 1 in 4, right? So that's a 20% drop rate. That's almost 3 times the drop rate you'd expect for a quarterback. Adjusting for all of that, like he's still quite good. He did experience a fair amount of pressure. I will say a lot of the pressure he experienced, good chance it was like his fault. Some of those pressures. PFF, which despite what I wrote about PFF, I still think is a useful resource. And we can talk about what I wrote about PFF in a little bit, but right now the game. But yeah, Darnold only had like 8 dropbacks, and 3 of them were under pressure. PFF suggests that all 3 of those pressures are his fault for holding onto the ball. I don't know if I'd go that far, but certainly he played a pretty significant role in receiving pressure. Now, one of those pressures, I believe, was a communication error from Ed Ingram. And I think that was more Ingram's fault, but fine, whatever. We're parsing hairs at that point. That's the one issue I think from this game where I feel like you got to work on that. But he did do a really great job of accurately pushing the ball down the field. And that throw over the linebacker to Jalen Naylor over the middle of the field was so pretty. It was beautiful. And that's the kind of stuff, like you mentioned, James, that people were talking about in camp, that like these throws are like ideal throws. I don't know if people remember, but like when I was interviewing people for, and I think one of those interviews was on this podcast, but I was talking to people about Sam Darnold back when he was like declaring for the draft, and I didn't super like him as a prospect. And I didn't really like kind of see it. And a lot of people were like, well, Arif, like, first of all, his arm's great, which, whatever, a lot of bad quarterbacks have good arms, but sure, his arm's great. He already has touch, which JJ McCarthy doesn't even have that, right? And he's a really good prospect. He already has touch. He knows how to feather the ball. He knows how to later the ball, which is what we were seeing in this game. He reads defenses pretty quickly, despite the fact that he only started for one game at one year. That would have been insane. 1 year at USC because of injury. And he has all of these great traits. I'm like, well, he throws a lot of picks and he fumbles the ball a lot. Like that seems important. It's like, yeah, well, he's got to fix that. And I just got so sick of talking to draft analysts because it was like, oh yeah, he's got to fix the turnover. Like it was just so easy you just fix that. You're fine. Oh, is it that easy?
He just rubs some dirt on it. He's good. He can walk it off.
Can you imagine how good Jameis would be if you could just fix turnovers?
You mean he wouldn't go 40-40? He might actually do better?
Right. Like a Jameis where you fix turnovers, where he goes like 35-7 or 35-12 consistently. That guy is a Hall of Famer. Like that's you just got to fix turnovers. Like, come on.
Yeah.
But it seems like he might have fixed his turnovers. I don't know yet.
Well, that was the thing everyone said about Jameis too, with the whole eye surgery thing.
Yeah, I'm still kind of a truther on that one, but I'm probably going to die on that hill. And it's fine if Jameis sucks. Like that's karmically probably a good thing. But I was very like, oh, he literally couldn't see the linebackers. That kind of makes sense. And he was squinting all the time. Like that feels important, right? But yeah, he didn't win the job in New Orleans, given 3 separate chances after the eye surgery. And now he is backing up someone who is a worse person than him. Kind of hard to figure out what to do there. I guess Amari Cooper tried to get traded, so there's that. But did you see that?
I did, yeah.
Yeah, phenomenal. But yeah, so like the stuff that people were talking about, the positives of Sam Darnold coming out that got him to become the number 3 overall pick. Yeah, you're seeing it in you saw it in this preseason game. Now, mind you, there's no game planning, right? They did play the starters, but it's not really the same as like the starters, right? Um, and they weren't running particularly complex defenses, so something to keep in mind. But I think that Sam Darnold overall was pretty positive. Obviously, Justin Jefferson didn't start. T.J. Hawkinson definitely wasn't there, right? And Aaron Jones wasn't there. So, you didn't have kind of the full complement on offense that you wanted, but you had the starting offensive line, minus a back injury to Dalton Reisner, who is still probably not a starter anyway, so kind of doesn't count. But, with Jordan Addison, Jalen Naylor out there, like, I think we've been talking about Naylor like he was pretty likely to win the QB3 battle or wide receiver 3 battle, especially if Brandon Powell didn't take another step forward, because Brandon Powell is kind of like, he's got a high floor but a low ceiling as we conceive of him. Right now he's like a really great utility receiver that the Vikings were really grateful to have last year, but it wouldn't be inconceivable that somebody could beat him out, and you were hoping that it was Jalen Naylor, despite kind of the year he ended up having after he returned from injury. And the way people were talking about it in camp, he kind of earned this role and he's had a lot of exciting plays. And then in this game, he did a really, really phenomenal job, not just at the catch point. Mind you, again, there was that pass defense that he should have won in the end zone. But overall, given kind of the ball location and the difficulty of throw and how quickly he'd be able to see the ball heading his way and stuff like that, that was great. But primarily he was really good at getting open, which is like a much more important skill than I know it's called receiving, but like catching is the less important skill of the two between getting open and catching, relatively speaking. And he seems like he's got both, but especially the route running stuff. So really excited to see that. So I think that it doesn't lock in his position as wide receiver 3, but it gives us a pretty good idea. In the Minnesota Football Party Fantasy League, which we got for the preseason, I went from like in a super good spot. Like I won the post show poll on who had the best preseason fantasy team, because I had JJ McCarthy and Jalen Naylor and Kene Nwangwu. To now, I think I'm boned because McCarthy's not playing for the rest of the preseason. That's obvious. And now I think Naylor might be too good, right? Like
that was the thing that was that Justin Jefferson was talking about too when he was on the mic, which if we can take a moment to appreciate,
oh my gosh,
just how much fun having Justin Jefferson with a live mic for the entirety of the third quarter. Even if he's on the field, I would listen to that.
Yeah, he's got such a great presence. He's so charismatic. He's so fun. Like he's always hyping up teammates. Obviously, the quarter that he was on, the third quarter, was also the most explosive quarter, right? There was like 2 big touchdowns. He had a thing that wasn't really a sack fumble, but seemed like for a second it was a sack fumble. It turned out to be an incompletion. The Raiders, I think, scored also, like a lot going on in that quarter, right? And he's like hyping up his boys. It ruled. It felt so fun to watch. But then even after kind of some of the negative stuff, like the sack fumble or whatever, like he was like pretty upbeat and positive. He's like, that's going to happen. Like it was great. I thought he did a wonderful job.
Yeah, they got to protect that. That's on them. They know what they know how they're supposed to fix that. And just like, yeah, okay. I loved when the play broke down and receiver was wide open. He's right before the throw. Like he picks it out immediately. That's where you got to go. That's where, oh, there it goes. You got it. Like he's just right on there.
That was awesome. Also, like the 2 times Paul Allen was like, hey, what would you call it here? And he's like, deep shot? What else? Yeah, is there another play?
Why would I do something else? Like,
I remember it was like 4th and 2 or whatever. And they're like, what would you call here to get open? And he'd be like, 1-on-1 coverage, you got to go deep. And it's like, you got to get the conversion, JJ. What are you talking about?
And then they go deep. And he's like, all right.
Yeah, it's so good. So yeah, that was really fantastic. But yeah, I don't know if Jalen Naylor is going to be playing that many more preseason snaps, man. Dang, that was pretty fun.
Yeah, he's that's pretty good. As far as the running situation was concerned, again, Ty Chandler looked pretty decent. looked faster than
Right.
everybody else. And the kickoff rule was interesting to watch. I'm not sold on it being a good idea, but it's different.
Certainly, I think better than the last couple of years we've had of kickoffs, right? Like the original kickoff return rule. Okay, so John Boyce had a video about how kickoffs are boring, and I was like, "Come on, man, I can't be party to this." And I watched it, and it's like, "Oh, it's because I'm a Vikings fan that I think that they actually are exciting."
Yes,
Because,
that.
because it's like, okay, so you had Percy Harvin, who I don't think people understand how good of a kickoff returner he was. He might be in the conversation for top 10 all time, maybe. Like that. I mean, I'm maybe overselling it a little bit, but honestly, he was a tremendous kickoff returner. And then they replaced him with the greatest kickoff returner of all time.
That, yes.
Like, what in the world? And so you get treated to like a decade of that. Plus, like in the middle of it, like Devin Hester returns a kickoff touchdown in the Super Bowl and is also returning a bunch against the Vikings specifically. And as a Vikings fan, your view of how explosive this play can be is kind of warped. And then when the Vikings got Kene Nwangwu, his rookie year, he only played like 8 or 10 games or something, and he got 2 touchdowns. It's like a broken barometer, right? Like there's no way we were gonna. And so you watch this John Boyce video, and it's like, oh, nobody else does that. Okay, I didn't realize that nobody else does that. Like Cordero Patterson has, I think, the majority of kickoff return touchdowns since his career started. Like, I don't mean the most. Obviously, he has the most. But I mean, over 50% of the kickoff return touchdown. Like what?
It's not okay.
And so, like, if you're just following the one team, that kind of screws it up. So it might not actually be that good of a play. But certainly since the new rule changes that moved the touchback from the 20 to the 25 and moved the kickoff from the 30 to, or from the 35 to the 30, something like that, right? Or the 30 to the 35. That like there's an increased incentive for touchbacks and an increased capability to produce touchbacks. It's kind of sucks. So I'm glad there are returns and there's much more variance. And this is what I appreciate. There's much more variance in where the ball ends up, and that to me is kind of the important thing. Like we did have a kickoff return touchdown. I didn't actually get to watch the replay. I believe it was Jacksonville. So you did have a kickoff return touchdown in the preseason, and we had another one almost like I saw a return to get up to the 50. It was really close to breaking one off, and I think it's like a pretty good rate. So obviously, for people unfamiliar, there's a new kickoff return rule. If you watch the preseason, it was explained kind of endlessly. In which case, I don't blame you for being less than enthused, given how often it was explained. But I still think it's better. But for people unfamiliar, so I believe the kicker kicks off from the 30. The coverage team lines up at the 35. There's a no man's land for about 10 yards. The blocking unit, which is either 9 or 10 players, lines up in a 5-yard gap between the 25 and the 20. I'm not looking at the rules as I'm speaking, so I could be getting some of the yardages wrong. But there's a landing zone that the ball has to land in from the 20 to the goal line. And if the ball doesn't land in the landing zone, it gets returned to the 40. Like that's where it is, unless it gets into the end zone. So if you kick it into the landing zone and it rolls into the end zone, that's a touchback that brings it to the 20. If you kick it out the back of the end zone or the ball lands in the end zone, that's a touchback that brings it to the 30, I think. And so there's an incentive to kick it into the landing zone. And that also increases the likelihood of a return. You can have either 1 or 2 returners back there, which is why you'd have 9 or 10 blockers. And as soon as the returner touches the ball or the ball hits the turf, the coverage unit can leave their yard line and the blocking unit can begin blocking. And so there's like this moment of stasis as the ball is in the air. Just, I think, kind of cool, honestly. Like it's kind of cinematic. And then the returner catches the ball, and now all these blocks are set up and stuff like that. So teams are still kind of figuring out what to do. No one has run like a trick play yet. Like I think with two returners, there's the possibility of you to do some lateraling and stuff like that. That'd be kind of fun, or some exchanges or fake exchanges between the two returners. There's already multiple strategies where you have one returner who's always returning, and then another player set up in the return zone as if they're the returner, and they immediately act as a lead blocker no matter what, even if it's kicked to them. And then there's some where it's like, they each have a half of the field, like they're playing doubles in tennis or something, right? So there's a couple of strategies emerging. Most of the kickoff returns aren't producing anything interesting. A lot of people are returning it to the 25 or the 27 or something. I've seen some returns get to like inside the 10, so that sucks. And then some returns get to the 30, and that rules. But there's a lot of variability, and I think that variability is kind of the important thing. Like, this is a skill, and the better you are at it, the more it helps your team. So that's the part I like. The Vikings have not demonstrated a capability to take advantage of it one way or the other through one preseason game, which doesn't concern me, but it'd be cool if the Vikings were one of the like really good teams. One of the designers of this so this comes from the XFL, one of the designers of this kickoff rule, Sam Schwartzstein, some nerd from Stanford who also happened to play offensive line for them, has suggested that like basically right now the winning strategy seems to be that you just treat it like an inside zone play and you block it like it's inside zone. Mind you, he is a former offensive lineman, so probably that kind of enters into the equation of this guy being super excited about inside zone. But I don't know. I think it's kind of cool. I like it. I like the variability. The Vikings have not done much with it, but that's fine. If Kene Nwangwu can turn into like a factor, that just seems cool to me. Like he ran a 4.2 whatever. He's so fast. We saw what happened like the one time he didn't have to read blocks and the Vikings just kind of parted the Red Sea and he just had a lane. And it was like, oh my God, I've been waiting for this for like 4 years. And he just zips through it. And as soon as he got to the second level, it was like, oh, it's over. He's faster than everyone on the field. He's faster than everyone on the field, and half the people on the field are from the Raiders. Like that's pretty good.
Yeah.
And he got a touchdown. Ruled. I still don't know if he's any good as a running back, but that ruled. So yeah, that was the kickoff rule explanation for everybody.
Well, let's talk defense, because when the first stringers were out there, I reiterated my comment that the Vikings are going to need to score 32 points every game, and it looked as though
it was bad.
Yeah, it looked as though that all you needed to do was a 2 to 3 step drop, and you were throwing over the heads of the corners who didn't know where they were.
Yeah, it should be noted that the Vikings did not blitz all that often. So Joshua Metellus had 2 pass rushing snaps. Camus Grugier-Hill had 2. Dwight McLaughlin had 1. Lewis Seen had 1. Brian Asamoah had 1. Theo Jackson had 1. And everybody else who rushed the passer was on the line of scrimmage. So this is a really low blitz rate for the Vikings. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. Nevertheless, I thought the Vikings did a pretty good job of getting pressure. So I'll start with a positive. Let's talk about like the Vikings' ability to actually generate pressure, which like feels weird, right? Like like last year they had to blitz to get pressure. This year they're not blitzing that much, and they still were able to generate like a fair amount of pressure. So I think it looks like 14 pressured snaps for the Raiders out of 24, 31 dropbacks. That's pretty good. And they didn't blitz all that often. Let me take a look at the Raiders like pressure splits specifically. So Gardner Minshew was blitzed on 6 of his snaps. Aiden O'Connell was blitzed on 6 of his snaps. And Anthony Brown technically also played quarterback, I guess. And he was blitzed on 3 of his snaps. So given all that, given that the Raiders had, let me take a quick look at that again, had 31 dropbacks, we do that, right? It's like 6 + 6 + 3. That's what I said. Okay, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's a 50% blitz rate. I've gotten so used to the Vikings, dude. Like blitzing everybody.
Yeah, be like, oh, it's an 88% blitz rate. Yeah, sure, why not?
Yeah, that's normal. That's normal. But it felt like the blitz packages were not that heavy. Because when they blitz, sometimes the Vikings would send like 6 instead of 5. And here it feels like the blitzes were lighter in volume as well, or in magnitude as well, right? So like that's part of it. But yeah, I mean they were able to get pressure with the front four. They were able to get pressure reasonably quickly. So we can talk about like who they had that was able to do that. So I think Patrick Jones did a great job generating pressure. Okay, fine, whatever. But you had Jalen Redmond, the defensive interior player that they signed from the UFL. He got a couple of pressures. Jihad Ward, I thought played pretty well. Like I thought that he generated both explosion and turn the corner capability that translates better as a pass rusher. So he's able to get a couple of pressures. I think he got a hit with one of his pressures. Dallas Turner was only on the field for it looks like 16 pass rushing snaps or passing snaps, and he had 15 pass rushes. And he got, I mean, like he got the hit and then the sack combo right at the end of that first drive that the Raiders were able to get into the end zone. And that ruled. And then he had another play where he won off the line of scrimmage, just didn't turn into a pressure because it got rid of the ball really quickly. And so being able to create that many pass rush wins on just like 15 pass rushes, I think is really exciting about this first round pick. So they did a good job there. Near the end of the game, we saw Bo Richter generate a couple of pressures again. Anthony Brown, I don't know if that's like huge, but Bo Richter got, I think he was officially credited with 2 sacks. So I don't think PFF wants to give him 2. So fine, sure, he had 1. But I thought that was pretty exciting. James Lynch was able to get some pressure. I think Lynch did that because Redmond set him up. So it's like less what James Lynch was able to do, but still. And that was all good. Like I think that you had a bunch of good games from some of these second and even third stringers that are really positive. The coverage was not kind of living up to that in any respect. The run defense was not great either. The decent pass rushers from the inside, aside from Jonathan Bullard, who had a really good game, both as a pass rusher and as a run defender. Aside from him, they kind of got caved in on the inside. The edge rushers couldn't contain on the edge. But the real issue, I think, was the coverage. The coverage was atrocious. And that includes the starters. It's really concerning because that was a concern heading into the season. And then the Vikings didn't invest a ton of draft capital into the position. And then their highest investment of draft capital into the position passes away. It's just a really difficult spot for the Vikings to be in, which is why Stephon Gilmore would visit the facility. As of this recording, he hasn't signed with the Vikings, but I expect that that's probably going to happen. But yeah, I mean, they didn't get good play from Byron Murphy, who was like following Jacoby Myers around the field and just gave up oodles of space, just over and over and over again. He gave up a ton of space. Like I think he officially allowed 3 receptions, but the space he was giving up when he wasn't targeted was also a pretty significant issue. He played mostly on the outside. He only played like 1 or 2 reps in the slot. And I think that maybe ideally he plays a little bit more in the slot, even though he was the primary outside guy for the Vikings last year. It seems like he might be better in the slot, but either way, he had a really bad game. Kamu Grugier-Hill as a linebacker, he missed his run fits a fair amount. He also made a bunch of big plays in the run. But he also gave up a bunch of space in coverage in the same way. I don't know. It was bad. Even the guys that had kind of good games also had bad games. Like Caleb Evans had like a pretty good showing in some instances. I think he did pretty well, like tackling someone near the line of scrimmage on a screenplay. And then he gave up space in coverage in the other instances. And it's just like kind of like throughout that. Like I don't know that any cornerback had a good game. PFF is suggesting that Fabian Moreau had a good game, and credit to him, he played 10 coverage snaps without getting targeted. That's a pretty good game. But yeah, for the most part, maybe Dwight McLaughlin. But for the most part, like not good in coverage. And that matters a lot. We've talked about this on the podcast a lot, where like coverage matters even more than pass rush. So I think there is something to be said about this pass rush kind of having it and having a lot more capability. We didn't even see Van Ginkel or Grenard, right? Like we didn't see either of them, and they're expected to be the biggest parts of the Vikings pass rush. So I'm excited about that, but the net result of this was the defense looked bad, and that's because the coverage wasn't there to complement the pass rush. So that was pretty bad.
Not a big positive. It was kind of frustrating to watch, but got overshadowed by the quarterback play of JJ McCarthy in the second half. Well, I say second half, starting in second quarter and third quarter. Like, it looked good immediately after his interception.
Yeah, and he kind of said it that way too. He was like, after I threw that pick, it kind of freed me. And it's like, I kind of get it, because like before you make a mistake, you're like constantly worried about making a mistake, and then once you make it, it's like, oh, okay. But like, there's also a bunch of ways for people to respond, right? Like, you make a mistake and now you're worried about the mistake that you just made a lot, and you play a little bit more timid, and that's not what he did. He was a gunslinger after it. It's like he suggested that it loosened him up, kind of like if you're recovering from injury and you're afraid to get hit, then you get hit once and then you're probably fine after that. Like a lot of athletes have described that particular experience. It might have been like that, but for making a major mistake. So I'm glad that that was his response, as opposed to kind of turtling or being afraid or whatever. Like he immediately like chucks it deep after that. He's like, oh man, okay, well, time to make up for it, I guess. And he did. It was fantastic. So when I say, like, for example, that Bo Nix had an overblown game, there's a good case to be made that despite Bo Nix's 71% completion percentage, he actually had a bad game, and Jackson McIntyre over on Twitter makes the argument that he had a bad game. I don't think so. I think he was fine. So when I say people overrated Bo Nix's game because they say he was fantastic when he was actually just fine, or potentially even worse than fine because he's always throwing off his back foot, that's different than me saying people are overrating JJ McCarthy's game, because the degree of difference is much smaller, like where I'm at versus where other people were after the game. I think that, you have to take into account that pick. I think that you do have to take into account that his timing was still a little bit off at times. I think you do have to take into account that his pocket presence, while generally very good, did have some holes in it, like in the non-fumble that turned out to be an incompletion. These are somewhat small nits to pick, but timing errors add up in NFL games against starters, and they don't show up as often in NFL games against backups. And so I think there was a lot of room to grow. But the stuff that was good ruled. It was awesome. The deep throws to Tristan Jackson, all of them ruled. I love them. The 45-yard touchdown was perfect, just picture perfect. Which is also like kind of annoys me, because I watched like all of the rookie quarterbacks, and when I put my Bo Nix take out there, someone responded with if the pass to Reynolds had been a completion, people would have said that was the best pass that any rookie quarterback threw this weekend. And it's like, well, okay, it is important that he didn't catch that, because that's like a critical part of the way that we evaluate that. But also, that's not true, because that throw to Tristan Jackson from JJ McCarthy was way better. It was awesome. It was perfect. And even better than that was the Jaden Daniels throw to Giambi Brown. Like that was even better. That was awesome. And you're telling me that this one where he like doesn't throw it ahead of Reynolds and allows the DB to catch up to his guy, and he has to extend up instead of out, you're telling me that's a better throw? Like, it's not a bad throw. It's a good throw, but like, it's not up there, man. It's not up there. These two were awesome, and McCarthy's highlights were really excellent. But like I said, like most of his passing snaps demonstrated a pretty good degree of pocket awareness, a pretty good degree of mobility. Plus he had like rushing capability, which we saw a little bit of. I thought that he played not just ahead of schedule, but substantially ahead of the schedule that the Vikings had suggested he was on. And so I thought that was, really, really exciting stuff. And he had like one drop. He had like 6 pressures. He managed most of those pressures all right. He had 8 first downs. on 19 dropbacks, I think, which is a great rate. Uh, he threw the pick. Okay, that sucks. But that overall was a very encouraging performance. Not enough for me to think that were he healthy right now, that he should take the starting job from Sam Darnold or anything like that. But he's much further ahead of schedule than I thought, and that's really exciting. Like I think that this is like positive takeaways for sure. Some discrepancies that need to be noted and taken care of. It wasn't a perfect preseason showing. That's fine. That's what the preseason is for. But way better than it was worse. Way better than it was worse.
And
in fact, I think like overall, I think only Tristan Jackson had a better game than him. Right, like that. I think speaks pretty well. Right, like I mean, the Vikings won, so obviously a bunch of people had some good games. But like Christian Jackson was maybe the only player. Maybe Jalen Naylor because his mistake wasn't as costly as McCarthy's. But I don't think any offensive lineman, had as good of a game as JJ McCarthy. Certainly not any running back, right? Like Ty Chandler's drops were pretty vicious, and his runs were fine. They were pretty good. Ken Nwangwu nearly killed JJ McCarthy that on the pick, right? Like that seems important. Like. And in pass protection after that, Wangwu was like fine, but like that's a pretty big mistake to make. And he didn't make the kind of positive, like he had a big run, but he didn't produce the positive plays, right? That big run was in essence, the first 7 or 8 yards were blocked for him. And those are the most difficult yards to get. He generates all the rest of it with his tremendous speed. But you know what I'm saying? Like McCarthy produced a lot of his own accord in a huge way, the way that Tristan Jackson did and the way that Jalen Naylor did. So yeah, I really like that. Sam Darnold also had like a really good game. So, it's pretty good. I think of the offensive linemen, I already mentioned Ed Ingram made a mistake. They didn't have that many snaps. That mistake stands out pretty big. Garrett Bradbury is actually a pretty good run blocker, but again, as a pass protector, yikes. Brian O'Neill wasn't that good. Okay, Christian Darrisaw was pretty good, especially like when Ty Chandler was running to the right was way worse than running to the left. Not that running to the left was amazing, but I think Christian Darrisaw is coming to his own as a run blocker. Like he's a pretty good pass protector, but as a run blocker, he's been inconsistent despite his tremendous size and actually finishing capability, despite the scouting report on him. And here we saw like some of that positive, but he was a really, really great pass protector in this game. But yeah, I liked Tyrese Robinson a lot. I like Spencer Rowland a lot. And I like Walter Rouse a lot. Like, which are all tackles. I don't know that I liked a single one of the interior players. But yeah, I like Dan Feeney was disappointing. Michael Juergens was disappointing. But the tackles, man, that ruled. I mean, I guess Tyrese Robinson played a fair amount of like right guard, but I mean, he entered camp as a tackle. So I've been thinking about him that way. But like, yeah, the backup offensive lineman, hooray, I guess, right? Like, I think that the Vikings may have a bit more depth there than we originally thought.
As far as defense was concerned, I thought Dallas Turner looked fantastic.
Yeah, he only had like the 16 pass rushing snaps. He made the most of them. But yeah, I mean, he like the explosion, the bend around the edge, the agility, the timing off the snap, all of that looked really good. It took a couple of snaps for him to get into his own. He didn't really show up until the red zone, and then he just blew it up. That was really awesome.
And of course, there was the kick at the end of the game. And
hooray!
Important to note because Kevin O'Connell has not won a preseason game until that moment.
Yeah, I got the monkey off his back.
So he's got that. He's got that going for him. So, but it was a nice pressure situation for him to be in. So it's worth mentioning that the game was literally on the line for it. So good.
Yeah, for what that's worth. But yeah, he did in the box score. You'd say he missed, but obviously it was blocked. The previous kick attempt that he had. Again, I'm not the kicking expert that Luke Braun is. It involves feet, so more power to him. But when I'm looking at it from like non-mechanically, when I'm just looking at kind of the arc of the ball, right? He I thought that wasn't his fault. Like, there's a lot of blocked kicks where people just automatically don't blame the kicker because it's a blocked kick. What are you going to do? But kickers actually do have a decent amount of control over that because of the kick angle that they're taking. So this was a relatively short kick. And so there's no reason to reduce the angle because a lot of kickers on long kicks, like a 65 yarder, right? That might be like a record set or something. I guess it'd be 67 now. You want to reduce the trajectory of the kick over what you normally would kick so you can get more distance. And the risk is that it's easier to block because, again, a lower trajectory, right? Like you don't have to jump aside to block it. This was a relatively short kick, and so he needed a pretty high trajectory, kind of like Steph shooting over Wembanyama, right? Like that. Like you gotta arc that ball up high, and obviously he didn't do it perfectly, but it was a pretty high trajectory. Like that was just a play that dude made. Like what a wonderful play that guy made. I think he's like an edge rusher that made the play. Whatever, great job, dude. I don't really think that's on Will Reichert. I think if you're Will Reichert, you want to act as if it is on you so you can see what you can do to avoid that in the future. But like from the outside looking in, like that, I think he did what he needed to do, and that just happened to be like a really great play. So don't want to. I mean, that's still like a missed kick for Hell League rules, but it's not an extra point. It's just a missed kick, which still costs a lot. Like what Hell League rules are we using, by the way? Because there's like two.
Oh, it's just Hell League. So it's all the defensive joy, all the defensive point joy that happens, all the offensive point joy, and all the special team stuff. It's everything.
Okay, but like missed field goals are
worth
a lot again?
Negative points. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Great.
They cascade. So I think it's within the first 15 yards.
Oh yeah, we workshopped that.
Yeah. It cascades, so it works in your favor if it's a 50-yard field goal and it goes in, and it works against you if it's a chip shot and a miss.
Yeah, as God intended.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so
take that from your number one theologian from a Vikings podcast.
Okay. Also, let's ignore that. Also, Reichert made every extra point. Hey, look at that.
That's an important stat. Underrated stat, quite frankly.
Not by Vikings fans, I think. I think they understand the importance of it.
Well, yeah. Well, let's wrap up the Raiders stuff and go into a little bit about what we should expect from the Browns. Obviously, McCarthy is not going to play. This conversation would have been slightly different if McCarthy didn't need knee surgery. The understatement of 2024, I suppose. So what should we expect against the Browns this weekend?
I mean that's a pretty interesting question because I don't know if the Browns are hoping to play a fair amount of starters given that they have joint practices with the Vikings. And so given that there's going to be a lot of reps for the starters throughout camp and the way that the Vikings have approached this in the past and their joint practice partners have approached it in the past, they don't tend to play starters at all in that scenario. My understanding is that Deshaun Watson is not going to play in week 2, but he is going to play like week 3 against the Seahawks. So in the joint practices, Watson will get most of the reps with the ones. And I think that the Vikings are going to kind of mirror that. But the problem, of course, is that they're missing a quarterback now. So is Sam Darnold going to take any reps, or is it going to be all Jaron Hall? Is Nick Mullins going to suddenly show up? I guess
it's unfortunate.
I guess the point of Nick Mullins, right?
It's unfortunate that DiNucci signed with the Bills.
Yeah, I mean, Case Cookus is still out there. So, but yeah, Ben DiNucci, Bill. The state of New York seems to attract these Italian American quarterbacks, which great.
Victoria on Twitter was having some real conniptions about some of DiNucci's products that he's involved in.
Oh, like not like his actual play on the field, but like
have you seen the hats that DiNucci sells? He's like a business partner for?
I assume they're not like the comically large baseball hats.
No, they're not. They are incredibly popular in the Dallas area, though. It says Dallas, but it's upside down on the hat.
Oh, I can see why Victoria would be upset by that.
It's just trying to wrap her head around that and then finding out later that they're super popular. It's like, I don't know how to deal with any of this.
That's not real. um, as an owner of Danucci related merch, I don't think he was involved in this merch that we got, but as an owner of Danucci adjacent merch, I cannot criticize it, I guess. Um, yeah. Sorry, Victoria. Also, uh, don't watch him play. I don't think you'll enjoy that.
The way, the truth, and the sidearm is what I was referring to with him. So
Yeah, it's yeah. People love it when Matthew Stafford and Patrick Mahomes throw sidearms. I don't see what the problem is.
So as far as the Browns game is concerned, doesn't sound like
I think
Deshaun
we're
Watson's
probably
going to play.
yeah, which I think might suggest we're not going to get a ton of Sam Darnold. Um, I think we're probably going to see Nick Mullins. I don't actually know, but like I think we'll probably see a fair amount of Mullins. So the Browns are probably not going to play any of their starters because, again, those joint practices, kind of worth taking a look at, I guess. But we're probably going to see a fair amount of like the Browns have like some interesting players throughout their defense that are kind of worth taking a look at. So we're not going to see like Zarius Smith in the game. He's just going to be starting fights with the Vikings in practice instead. But we're probably not going to see Mike Hall. I think some like allegations I didn't actually read them, but like allegations just came out this week against this guy. So second round defensive tackle, probably not going to see a ton of him. Or if we did, that's going to be a curious thing to wonder about. But yeah, second round defensive tackle. If he plays, probably it's going to be an issue for a backup offensive line. So keep that in mind. But they've got like a pretty decent group. Like at edge rusher, they've got Obo Okoronkwo, who's like a decent rotational edge rusher. They've got Maurice Hurst at defensive tackle, which I don't know if he's going to play, but like if he does play, that could be, he's a starting quality player at times. So that could be a big issue. I'm looking through at this list. So Jordan Hicks probably not going to play. GOK probably not going to play. Mahamoud Diabate was like an edge rusher in college who is a linebacker in the NFL, and he's a super athlete, and he seems to have a lot more play recognition than you typically get from a player with his background. Like I know that edge rushers have converted to linebacker a couple of times. Obviously, Anthony Barr is one of them. I think Jamie Collins is another good example of a successful one, but it happens a fair amount, and they don't always have the really quick play recognition that you'd expect. He seems to have it, and as an undrafted like rookie from last year, it's like kind of nice that he's got that going for him. Otherwise, you've got like 6th round pick Nathaniel Watson, who some people really liked as a linebacker prospect. You look through the secondary, and this is like a secondary that their front end is really tantalizing, right? So Greg Newsome, who is not going to be in practices because of an NFI, Martin Emerson Jr., both of those players had stellar starts to their career, like really excellent starts to their career. Denzel Ward is a pretty good corner. After that, it's a bunch of guys that maybe it's just because I'm not familiar with them. Like maybe they're actually quite good, but my read on them is that, the Browns depth at cornerback is like pretty worrisome. Maybe not as worrisome as the Vikings depth at cornerback, but pretty worrisome. And so we might see some more fireworks from that group of second tier receivers, whether that's Tristan Jackson or maybe if Jalen Naylor plays Jalen Naylor, or I don't know, Thayer Thomas could start producing, or Malik Knowles. Please, Malik Knowles. Like he's like one of my other fantasy guys. Like please produce. But yeah, Roddy Hickman might play. I don't know if he does. He's pretty decent for a second string safety. So is Rodney McLeod Jr. He's kind of old at this point, but pretty decent. So that middle of the unit is probably better than you expect a lot of defensive second teams. But from a passing perspective, I think that the Vikings could probably get a lot done. So if we see a struggling passing performance on offense, that's kind of like a reason to be a little bit concerned. On the other side of the ball, the Browns are probably not going to be playing. So Nick Chubb, obviously, is coming off of the pub. Jedrick Wills on the offensive line. Jack Conklin on the offensive line. Plus, the rookie Luke Weipler is injured, so you're going to see a pretty depleted Browns offensive line. I think Nick Harris just came back from injury. He's a center. But like that offensive line is like not bad for a backup group. Again, it depends on who's going to end up playing, but like maybe DeJuan Jones plays. And if he does, that's like a huge guy to have to get around. I'd actually like to see that matchup between him and Dallas Turner. DeJuan Jones is like these like 36-inch arms, just a tall, long dude. And so for Dallas Turner, who's kind of like, he doesn't have as long arms, he's more, his athleticism is there, but the length isn't always there. That's be kind of an interesting matchup. Zach Zinter's a 3rd-round pick from Michigan. Michael Dunn is a guy that I've liked forever since he performed really well in the AAF, and he's stuck around in the league since then. James Hudson is a pretty decent tackle for a backup tackle. They've got Hakeem Adeniji from the Vikings, right? Jermaine Ifedi at right tackle. So they've got like a pretty decent group of backups at along the offensive line, better than, again, most of the league. They also have Wyatt Davis, for what that's worth. And then after that, like the receiver group is not good outside of their starters. Maybe Cedric Tillman takes a step forward. Maybe David Bell lives up to his potential, but they're both like, they're more potential than they are talent at this point. They do have a rookie in Jamari Thrash that's like kind of fun. But we have to, 5th-round rookie receiver. We kind of have to wait to see if he's going to be any good. Quarterback, it's probably Jameis. If not, it's going to be Dorian Thompson-Robinson. Whatever. They're pretty deep at running back. They always are. But like mostly it's this offensive line. So if pressure is a problem, it's not a reason to cause alarm. But if that secondary is getting torched against like Jalen Darden, okay, we've
got some real problems at that point.
Yeah, like, okay, Byron Murphy getting cooked by Jacoby Myers, that's bad. But like Caleb Evans getting cooked by Jalen Darden, all right, okay, let's bring Stephon Gilmore in. That's troubling.
The check will be blank. It'll be fine. We just need a little bit of assistance, a little bit of something else back there. Well, let's go to the mailbag. And the first couple of questions are obviously McCarthy related, kind of yelling out into the ether. Most of this is going to be on topic, so it only goes off the rails near the end of the mailbag. So a PFF commenter, which is an underrated username, by the way.
That's so good.
Asks, when will Sean Payton say that he knew JJ would hurt his knee?
He has like a predilection for forecasting, right? Like, so, I think he's kind of like LeBron in that way, right? Like LeBron always knows which basketball players are going to blow up and be good. Players in other sports, he reads all the right books before they get popular. Like they're kind of similar in that way. Of course, I like LeBron, so I guess there's a difference there. But yeah, I think Sean Payton is probably going to say something in like 5-6 years, be like, yeah, I knew that guy was injury prone. Never had an injury.
5-6 days is when Thomason's going to bring it up.
Oh, I forgot Thomason's on that beat.
Yeah.
That accelerates the
Thomason tends to accelerate the process a bit. Vignesh asks, for Arif's theology corner, and for good reason we're revisiting this, as a practicing Hindu, what crimes had I committed in my previous life to have been reincarnated as a Vikings fan?
Saints fan. That was the sin you committed.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
You know what? That's fair. Cam X Storm asks, spooky season has started early. My theory is that the Minnesota Vikings as an entity were created by Cenobites from the Hellraiser movies to inflict pain to hundreds of thousands of fans simultaneously to use them as fuel. Can you equate the Viking fandom to any other horror franchise? I think the knee situation turns into a Jason thing where it just kind of...
Yeah, I was going to say it's like Jason, right? Where it's just like he keeps relentlessly... Well, I guess it happens every year, right? Because Jason's like a Friday the 13th thing. I think like Mike Myers, right? Like that's relentless, right? Like that's... You shoot him, he's still walking, right?
Yeah, that's... Yeah. that seems to be the best possible answer here. And JJ McCarthy also from what are we talking here? Cam X Storm.
Cam X Storm.
Cam X Storm. JJ McCarthy quoted Latin in his tweet to fans. From the Dante's Inferno, from Dante's Inferno, which level of hell do the Vikings fans currently reside in? I was referring to it earlier as Dante Culpepper's Inferno for Vikings fans.
Right, which is pretty contextually appropriate. So in Inferno, in Dante's Inferno by Dante, there are, I'm not going to look this up. I'm just going to go off of memory and or pop culture. 7 rings of hell, let's just say. Why not? My understanding is not just that the 7 rings of hell get worse as you go down, but it's like very specific. Like,
correct.
Yeah, like it's not like, oh, it's fire again but hotter. It's like these are very specific tortures. So
for very specific crimes. And all of these people seem to be from modern day at the time, Italy. And all the crime. So we're just walking through here, and all of these people are dealing with all of this.
Oh, look, that's Catherine de Medici. That's so weird. How strange. One could argue that might have qualified as political commentary. So I don't remember the crimes and the tortures associated with each individual ring. So I'm just going to fall back on the tweet. I promise you can get worse. I promise you it can get worse. It can always get worse. So, 5th circle of hell.
The Richard Seymour divorce asks, for Arif's historian corner, have we ever had a shorter timeline between eternal optimism to existential dread? I'm reminded of we've referenced it before, the Sam Bradford game against the Saints, and then a couple days afterwards, that was the end of his season. And it kind of hung on for a little while if he was going to be able to return or not, and it turned out that it just wasn't going to be worth it. Yeah,
I think Sam Bradford is like the best example, right? Where it's like, we didn't know if he was going to be good or bad. Like, obviously he had the half Shermer season or whatever that was like fine. But he looked great in camp, and he was outstanding against the Saints. And then after the game, it wasn't even after it was like a couple of days after the game. It's like, oh yeah, by the way, his knee is like 3 times the size of a normal knee. So we're going to have to take a look at that. Oh, he's out for the season. You're like, wait, what? He played the whole game. The whole game.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think because like with McCarthy, like from when he was drafted through all the camp reports, like there was like a video for Purple, I think it was for Purple Insider, it might have been for Score North, where like Matthew Collar and someone else, maybe it's Dane Mizutani, in which case probably for Purple Insider because neither of them work for Score North, but a video, right? Where they're both talking about JJ McCarthy, like it is like OTAs or one of the pre-training camp practices, and they just can't get over how live the ball is. Like the sound it makes when it hits a receiver's hands, like just zips out of his hands. And they like it's like 5-6 minutes of that. And then they talk about like for 5-6 minutes how the ball sounds coming off of Will Reichardt's foot. Like it's just like they're like stunned by these rookies that are just powerful at the things that they've been drafted to do. And like from that moment, like there's this building sense of optimism, really positive camp reports, unless you believe that one Dove Kleiman tweet. Baffling, just baffling. It was like, yeah, according to reports, he's had poor practices. What reports? Anyway, it sounds like he's been having great practices. People were building up, buying in. So I think there was actually a longer timeline. Like, I don't think it was just the preseason game that made people buy into McCarthy. I think people were buying into McCarthy gradually over the course of the offseason, and then it got kind of taken away, but not as dramatically as the time Teddy's knee exploded, right? Which also feels like a candidate here because like Teddy was like
2 or 3 days
promising.
After that. Yeah.
Yeah. Teddy was promising in 2014. He had made some improvement in 2015. Some writers, maybe people named Arif, hypothetically, may have oversold the amount of improvement he made in 2015. Who's to say? But he made improvements in 2015, especially near the end of the year, which I'm now arguing doesn't matter strategically for my own purposes. But it seemed like a promising player. And then 2016 training camp, universally, everyone is like, oh my God, this guy's got it. He has figured out, he's cracked the code. He's completing all these deep passes. And, this Vikings defense is good, right? Like he's cooking like good Xavier Rhodes, right? Like he is destroying people, right? And then he has this outstanding preseason game against the Chargers. And I feel like this is another area where there was a lot of people skeptical of Teddy. And then you have the one preseason game. People are like, oh, this is what people were talking about like all training camp. Like that this guy is like doing stuff. He even scrambled, which some people suggested might have been his downfall. But he even scrambled and he looked great. And then his knee exploded. Like we say that a lot about knee injuries. Kirk Cousins' Achilles exploded or whatever, right? Like Adrian Peterson's knee exploded. No, man, Teddy almost had to get that thing amputated. Like he almost died, like actually died, right? Like that, like, whoa, like his knee exploded, right? So that one's bad, right? Like it got so bad that a reporter, believe it was it might have been Ian Rappaport, one of the national guys. And people who like listen to this podcast long enough probably have now picked up on the fact that I very often confuse Breer and Rappaport. I haven't actually acknowledged that fact until now, but yes, that clearly happens. One of those national guys tweeted out erroneously that Vikings players were throwing up. And the mood was so somber that was extremely believable. And, ambulances and stuff, like it was bad, right? So I think that like the emotional whiplash probably greater there, obviously because the downside was much worse than what happened with McCarthy, but the upside was there too, right? Like people really did believe that we'd stumbled upon the future of the franchise. It was a first round pick, but like, stumbled upon the future of the franchise there. Or Sam Bradford, like, oh my God, that trade was a great idea. Holy crap. This guy just destroyed the Saints. The good Saints. We remember these Saints as being kind of good.
Yeah.
And he just demolished them. 400 yards or whatever. I think it was like 370. I don't remember. But it was great. It was phenomenal. And like not just like Sam Bradford dinking and dunking. Sam Bradford throwing bombs, right? Like it felt great. And then his knee inflated somehow, as they do.
As
right?
they do.
Like,
sometimes this is just what happens when you're a Vikings fan. You just have to accept a certain amount of suspension of disbelief. And
it just
that's
seems
where
so
we're at.
like the writers couldn't figure out what knee injury to give him, so they were just like, it gets big. Okay. So yeah, there's at least two instances in recent Vikings history where you go from eternal optimism to crushing defeat, probably faster than this McCarthy one, but it's up there.
I'm just reminded that the writer's strike just happened, so a certain amount of laziness could have been involved, I guess. Janek asks, for no specific reason, but which one of you would be the better right knee donor? My right knee stuff is fine. Everything else in my body is awful, but my right knee is fine.
I think just by, like, heuristics, we can assume that your knee is probably not as good as the average knee.
That's mean. Also, probably.
I just like, look, the rest of your body is bad.
And it's
like,
not
and
even
this is
like
not...
the pain in my that I'm going to have surgery for is going down my left knee, not my right. It's going down the left leg. So, I mean...
Yeah, okay, that doesn't inspire confidence, I'm going to be honest.
Whatever. Not that I'm trying
but
to
my knees are... I'm not going to say my knees are the healthiest knees in the world. But, I have not suffered any knee injuries. I did have a really brutal 4-square injury in like fourth grade. That was pretty bad, but I don't think I actually did probably tear some, but that was a left knee. See, so we're fine.
My
it was a contact injury.
My time when I destroyed my knee, it was my left knee. So, nope.
Yeah, but like you have like a fundamental systemic issue with your body.
That's
Again,
That's the
it
nicest
sounds
way
mean.
anyone has ever called me fat in my whole life.
I was
that is
actually
one of the
about to
nicest
specify
ways
that had nothing to do with that.
anyone
I was
has ever
about to
called
say
me overweight. Yeah, that's systemic.
dude, your spine is bad. That's what I'm saying. It's a bad spine.
That's the show title. Also from Janik, what are some examples of QBs that missed their entire rookie season with an injury, and how did they look in their first healthy season?
That's a great question, and I was going to look it up for a piece, and then Luke Braun just enters my DMs, and he's like, "Yeah, I've got an idea for a piece about knees." Actually, no, it would have been way better if he said that. Let me see what he actually said exactly, because it was infuriating the way he said it. As he does, right?
I think it was with the step on your toes.
Yeah, it's writing about knees. Would I be stepping on your toes? Was what he said, which is just go to hell, man. My first response: I hate that you said that like that, but no, it wouldn't. And so he did that, and so I stopped doing research on rookie quarterbacks who got injured early because I didn't have the feeling of a deadline. And so I'll probably do that research tomorrow instead to write a piece, which means I didn't do it in time for this podcast. So off the top of my head, not a ton of candidates. Joe Burrow got injured 10 games into the season. For the rest of the season, Robert Griffin III got injured relatively late in the season and then reappeared for the playoffs. Bad idea. I mean, a lot of the ones I'm thinking of are just like Tyrod Taylor got injured to make way for Justin Herbert, which is the opposite of what we're talking about.
Damned.
But yeah, I'm sure people will remind me of like rookies that missed their like entire rookie year. It feels like Drew Brees is one of those guys, but I actually think he played his whole rookie year. Man, I'm like the problem is like the further back you go in history, like a Burt Jones or a Greg Cook or whatever, like they got an injury and that was like it, right? Like it was like, their career's over. I mean, you can't fix that. That's a torn Achilles. Who in the world has ever fixed that? It's like, okay, we're way past that now. So there's not like a ton of examples I can think of. Like certainly a lot of rookie quarterbacks got injured. I don't know that they got injured early enough in their rookie year to count. God, there's like a super obvious one I'm sure that I'm missing. I mean, Deshaun Watson tore his ACL his rookie year, I think. That was after a fair amount of time. And, purely on the field, he played pretty well after that. For the Texans specifically. He's not played well since leaving the employ of the Texans. Yeah, it's just not like a ton of examples I can think of where they missed their whole rookie year. Like I can think of a lot of players like Travis Kelce basically missed his whole rookie year. Demaryius Thomas missed his whole rookie year due to injury. Todd Gurley, I think, missed his whole rookie year or was about to. He got recovered way faster than you expected. Willis McGahee, there's a selection bias to who I'm sure there's a lot of people who missed their whole, like Caleb Farley, for example, missed his whole rookie year and is not good. Jameson Williams missed his whole rookie year. And though he's wide receiver too in Detroit Lions camp, he has not been good yet. They're pretty high on him, by the way. So I don't know. But, and I mean the beat writers, not just the Lions. But yeah, I can't think of any quarterbacks specifically that missed their rookie year. Please feel free to let us, I'm going to get a ton of responses. Feel free to let me know if I just like majorly forgot a guy that missed the vast majority of his rookie season or all of it as a quarterback due to injury, not like a Patrick Mahomes or a Jordan Love.
Help Arif do research by pointing out that he missed out somebody.
Yeah, tell me I'm wrong.
Yeah, that it happens often enough. Let's be accurate about it. Dustin asks, in regards to sustained cornerback play, is the position less or more prone to sustained high-level play than other positions? If less, does there seem to be a reason as far as a cornerback play?
It's less prone for two reasons. One, it's an oft-injured position, not as injured as like running back, right? But like it doesn't appear as often in our injury metrics because when they get injured, they return to play. Their injury seems more likely to impact their level of play. Defensive tackle probably gets injured more often than cornerback, but when they return to play, they often play at a pretty similar level as they were pre-injury. And that does not seem to be the case for cornerbacks who rely a lot on speed. Like it's difficult to gain speed back. It's not as difficult for whatever reason to gain explosion back. Don't know why that is. Very similar muscle groups. That just seems to be the case. So that's one reason. The other one is that coverage is itself very volatile. It just is. And I don't know why that is, because like, you know, you would think it's because their job is to prevent an event as opposed to cause an event. And preventing an event is a much more volatile skill, generally speaking, globally, than it is causing an event. But along the offensive line, that's a pretty, like pass protection is a pretty stable skill. And so that's like clearly not universally the case, even in football, that a prevention activity is less stable than a creation activity, that also exists at like the unit level too. Like offenses are more stable than defenses. Pretty similar reasoning. So yeah, it is just a less sustainable style of play. It's pretty contingent upon matchup. Yeah, I think those are probably the reasons, but certainly it does seem less prone to sustained high-level play. And when you get a guy like a Champ Bailey or a Darrelle Revis, like a lot of people think of Darrelle Revis as like a short peak, but not really. He had a fairly long career of really excellent play. People just hyper-focused in 2009 because it was one of the greatest seasons of quarterback play we've ever seen, which, fair enough. Richard Sherman had, relatively speaking, kind of a shortish peak, I guess, against history. Patrick Peterson didn't, but like Patrick Peterson is like a legend for that reason. But like you got a lot of really good cornerbacks that only had 3-4 really good years, not even necessarily consecutively. Like Marcus Peters is maybe an example, because again, his good seasons are sometimes like deceiving in how good they are because they're actually less good than they seem. Yeah, it just seems like when you look at the history of like really solid, really good cornerbacks, it's much harder to find guys that sustain for several years at a time. Like J.C. Jackson, when he left New England, just fell off, right? And there's like a dozen examples of that kind of thing. Xavier Rhodes was only good for the Vikings for like 4 years, right? Like that kind of sucks, right? Trey Waynes was good for even less. Yeah, it seems less prone to sustained high-level play. Whereas like a wide receiver, like that guy's going to be good. That guy's good when he's like 23, 60% chance he's also good when he's 30, right? Like that crazy sustainability at that position. Kind of the opposite of cornerback.
Let's go to David, who asks, for some reason, a Caleb Evans is getting killed by media and fans, but Byron Murphy somehow escapes all criticism for getting destroyed every game. Are we sure Evans isn't a better corner?
Yeah. I mean, Evans had a better game against the Raiders than Byron Murphy did, but also Evans wasn't up against Jacoby Myers, so kind of a difficult. I'm pretty confident that Byron Murphy is a better corner. I think that your general observation is probably correct. I think Byron Murphy probably should receive, at least media-wide, more criticism for his level of play last year. Caleb Evans is probably getting too much credit. I thought he actually had a fine season, but people definitely focused on a lot of the negatives that he had. But we should also note, like the Vikings, teams will stick to veterans and starters and people that they've signed far longer than they should. So they're not a perfect barometer necessarily. But it should be noted that the Vikings were pretty aggressively willing to replace a Caleb Evans, and we're not particularly concerned about replacing Byron Murphy. And I think that is some signal. It's not a definitive signal, but it's some signal. And I do think Byron Murphy did play better, but I don't think he played as well as people maybe assumed. And that's, I think, a pretty fair observation. But I think this type of observation is going just a little bit further than I'd be comfortable going. I don't think Evans is a better corner. I do think that his flashes of play suggest that it's possible he could become a better corner. I don't think that's necessarily likely, but certainly I think it's more likely than people give it credit for. But I don't think that's the case now.
Let's go to Skimble Shanks, who asks, what's the most mediocre trade that the Vikings could possibly make at this time? Something where neither team gains or loses anything, and how close does the Booth trade come to hitting that mark?
Oh boy. I mean, that Booth trade was like very nothing, extremely nothing. I mean, you could have one that's really highly publicized that basically results in nothing. Lewis Seen for Trey Lance, right? That's not going to help anybody at all. But that one feels exciting to both fan bases, right? Like the Cowboys, I think Cowboys fans would be jazzed. Mike Zimmer gets to work with a super athlete first round pick at safety. The defensive back whisperer. Oh my God, that's crazy. That's so good. We need somebody to kind of help out, this cornerback group that we're excited about, but is very young. And Vikings fans, you got a Minnesota guy, he's a quarterback, super athlete, rocket arm. Has only thrown 200 passes in his career. It's more than that, but
his pitch count is low.
His pitch count is low. It's as small as his hairline. I don't have the right
possibly
to make
a great
joke,
safety. But we don't know.
Yeah, I mean, legendary scout PJ Fleck had some thoughts on that, and I think that it would do us well to pay attention to a Big Ten Coach of the Year. But yeah, that's definitely a trade that somebody floated today. Not to me, but it came across my feed that they should trade Lewis Seen for Trey Lance. This was a Cowboys blog, by the way, so figure out where their incentives are and work backwards. That's a very nothing trade that would get a ton of media exposure because wow, is he from Rochester, right? Something like that. Minnesota guy coming back to play quarterback. They just lost their quarterback of the future. Maybe Trey Lance could be a quarterback of the future despite him being on his fourth team, or I guess third team. Sure. Yeah, why not? That sounds like a nothing trade.
That would I would just like to read your write up on that trade. Like I want that trade to happen just so I have to read your response to it.
The problem is there is some level of on Twitter and Discord and this podcast, I'm very willing to commit to bits. It's pretty hard to do that when I publish a piece, right? That's tough to be Vikings trade for safety Trey Lance and publish that, right? That's a rough one, I think. So that's gonna require towing some lines, I think. But the Vikings are thin at safety now, so something to consider.
It is something to consider, especially with all the new subs that you got from the PFF piece that you just put out.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Let's talk about that, by the way. I said I'd talk about it.
Yeah, let's talk about it just a little bit. Yeah, the PFF piece that came out that was pretty highly regarded despite its spelling errors.
I got 3 spelling errors. 5,000 word piece. Okay, so I don't have an editor, as people maybe have figured out. I did run. Okay, so I did run the Draft Network piece by a couple of people. One of whom has editing experience, but generally I was hey, I need editing, and people helped out. But that was fine because I had a long time to work on that piece. The reporting itself started in late December, early January. And it got published in March. So I had a lot of time to sit on that one. This one I wanted to kind of capture the shock that everyone had that Sam Monson and Steve Palazzolo were going to leave PFF. So they've announced that within in 2 weeks from the announcement, they're going to be leaving Pro Football Focus for 33rd Team. And they're going to start a new podcast there. Seems like they maybe are still using the PFF studios. I don't know what the deal is. Maybe they're renting them from PFF, whatever. Or maybe they shot their promo in the PFF studio and they'll have a different studio by the time they actually shoot the podcast. I don't know. But that is meteoric. Sam Monson is one of the original Pro Football Focus guys. He might have been the 4th or 5th employee or something that they hired. PFF start like two of the employees that they hired are because Neil Hornsby, this is all in Matthew Collar's book, highly recommend purchasing it. A lot of what I got in that piece comes from the book. And I try to extensively cite it because Collar did a ton of legwork here. But like Collar describes, like Neil Hornsby arguing in a UK football fan forum with like a couple of other guys, and he hires two of them, Khalid El Said and Sam Monson. And so he's like a original guy. And not a long time after, they hire Steve Palazzolo. And Steve Palazzolo has professional experience as an athlete. He's a pitcher. He even played Double A for a little bit. There's like a story he's like on the same team as like Clayton Kershaw or something like that. Just kind of nuts stuff. But Monson was like a really big part of the public effort to not only get the grades out there, but to justify the grades, defend the grades, make the grades part of the public conversation well before Collinsworth bought the company. Palazzolo not only was a part of that, more importantly, was a big part in selling, especially initially, selling the product to teams, which gave PFF a lot of credibility because they're like, hey, 19 teams are, now it's 32, but like, in 2015, they're like 19 teams are used Pro Football Focus data. And like, that's really compelling, right? When you're justifying your grading system, the fact that you're contracted with 19 NFL teams seems to suggest that there is some credibility behind it. Now, mind you, the NFL teams don't actually use the grades. So like, it's kind of a bait and switch, but Palazzolo was like instrumental in getting teams comfortable with this sort of thing. So he's a big part of the business to business side. Their podcast, the PFF NFL podcast, huge for PFF, like on the consumer side, like really big. So the fact that they decided to leave is like meteoric. And it follows like a list of departures, both relatively public, like Austin Gale, and really private, but equally as important to Sam or Steve or Austin leaving. People like Rick Drummond, who, if you don't know who that is, read the piece because it goes into detail about how important he is. Or read Collar's book because Collar does a really great job explaining how important Rick Drummond is. Or Ian Perks, the first person that Neil Hornsby ever hired, Ian Perks, leaves after 16 years. This all occurred within a calendar year. Mike Renner gone after the 2023 draft. Like, these are like big players within PFF, both public facing like Mike Renner and kind of in between public and private like Eric Eager, who is their lead data analytics guy, leaving for Sumer Sports, and completely internal like Rick Drummond, meteoric. And so Sam and Steve announced their departure, and I had a little bit of a heads up that they were going to announce, and so I started working on the story as soon as I could. Not from them, by the way. They didn't tell me, so they're not actually sources for this story. But I had a little bit of a heads up, so I started working on the story about 8 to 12 hours before they announced, and before they announced their announcement, whatever. And so I started like calling around because I had actually talked to a number of people who worked at PFF and who had left PFF, and they were like, "Well, if you ever want to write a story about Pro Football Focus, because this is after I'd published the Draft Network piece, they're like, hit me up." I hit up a couple of them. I regret that I didn't hit up all of them because I just kind of, I forgot to talk to this guy, sort of, which upsets me. But I talked to like 6 people, not as many as I talked to for the Draft Network piece. And I got kind of a lot of the behind the scenes stuff about why Pro Football Focus is kind of not collapsing. Like the Draft Network piece is about a company that has lost its way, that does not have nearly the significance. And if at any moment the Draft Network, folds, that wouldn't shock me. Now they're still active and they're paying their employees on time now. So the Draft Network has not faded away, but it feels like, they hold a lot less importance in the public conversation than they did, 4 or 5 years ago. And that's what that story is about. PFF might not leave in terms of how important it is to the conversation, but they're at a crossroads. And it's because of all of these people leaving. So that's what that story is about. I talked to a bunch of people at PFF. I got some of the behind the scene stuff, like why George Charuri was fired, and what his relationship with the company is, what gripes current and former employees have about the culture at PFF, how private equity has changed things. So there's a lot of reporting done by AJ Perez at Front Office Sports, a lot of reporting done by Matthew Coller in his book, not more than a game, Behind the Numbers. And I kind of flesh out a lot of the stories that they had initially broken and reported on. And so that's what that piece is. Pretty popular. I was surprised. There's a lot of current and former PFF employees that interacted with it and engaged with it, which was really surprising to me. And I think that about 12, I want to say 10 to 12 people working either at the time or have left PFF contacted me after I published the story. Only one person contested any details in any of the stories. And after I kind of explained where I was coming from, they actually agreed. So I feel pretty validated in publishing that story. But check that out. That's over at Wide Left.
All right, let's go to our next question. And that's from Kenneth Allen, who asks, nearly every analyst I follow is not only high on Jordan Love, but puts him near or in the top 5 of quarterbacks for 2024. Kimes, Rosenthal, Tice. It's been a few months since Arif's piece, so have you changed your mind? Does the consensus give you pause or prompt you to reassess?
I mean, yeah, it does. I mean, I'm right, but it's important to note that when you put something out there and 9 or 10 very well qualified people disagree, that should kind of set off some alarms or, make you kind of wonder, are you wrong about this? And that kind of stuff does, in fact, give me pause. So I do think that there is something to say about like Mina Kimes and Nate Tice, Greg Rosenthal, all kind of having a really, really positive regard for Jordan Love. I think that's pretty meaningful. That said, I think that Jordan, like his greatest strength and his greatest weakness are kind of the same thing, which is like a cliche in terms of like writing these stories, but like I think is like genuinely true in this case, which is that he's not afraid of anything at all at any moment. And he got lucky with it, I think. So here's one problem in evaluating quarterback play that just plagues the process of evaluating quarterback play, even for people like, who does the QB school? JT O'Sullivan. Even people like JT O'Sullivan, who are infinitely more qualified than I am. One issue is that when quarterbacks take chances, it is really difficult to tell whether or not they accurately calculated their odds of success based on their capabilities of the chance they just took. So if every quarterback, let's say, had a Brett Favre-like approach to just F it, I'm throwing it down the field, right? Like a Rex Grossman in every one of us, right? You would get a lot of quarterbacks who miscalculated and still had really positive results just because of variance. So if you had 100 quarterbacks, which obviously you won't, but if you had 100 quarterbacks who took, 50 deep shots down the field, and all 50 of those deep shots had a 30% chance of success, that's bad. They all have made bad decisions. But just because of the way statistical distribution works and variance and randomness and luck works, a good chunk of those quarterbacks will look like they had a 45, 50, 60, maybe even 70% chance, the complete opposite, instead of 30, a 70% chance of being right about checking it deep into double coverage. Maybe their arm was so strong and their throw was so accurate and precise that it landed perfectly in the receiver's hands, when really they're not actually that precise of a quarterback. So it's actually really difficult to tell whether a guy who takes a lot of chances is correct about the chances that he takes until you get a really large sample size. So this was kind of an issue early on in Justin Herbert's career, where it's like, man, that guy is making he's cashing a lot of checks. And it turns out, his bank account was full. He could write those checks, right? it turns out he generally does have a really good understanding of the kind of risks he can take, and he can fit these things into tight windows. We saw that with Case Keenum. That guy loved throwing into tight windows. He loved it. And we all kind of understood that that wasn't going to pan out, and it didn't. But like with Jordan Love, because he's got a super strong arm, he's taking a lot of the same chances at the end of the year that he is at the beginning of the year. And I think that if you watch a lot of his end of the year stuff, he seems like a guy that is accurately assessing his risk profile. And as a result, is not a high risk, high reward quarterback. He's a guy that turns high risk into relatively low risk. I don't see him that way because I think that the totality of his play this season suggests that he probably got lucky on a lot of these tight window throws. He had according to Derek Clausen, he had a 43% success rate into tight windows, which is better than the NFL average. He also threw a really high proportion of tight window throws. And so, and especially in the playoffs, Jesus, like week 17, 18 in the playoffs, just a lot of tight window throws. He was really successful at them. If you have a 30% success rate into tight windows, you can produce a season where you get up to 44%. And I think he's more like that. I think that he's not as precise. His arm strength is his arm strength that shows up on every one of these throws. It's always going to be that good. But I think that he's not as precise as the end of his season suggests. I think that a lot of these quarterback analysts who I think a lot of them are more talented than me at this. Nate Tice for sure. Mina Kimes definitely. JT O'Sullivan infinitely, right? A lot of these quarterback analysts, I think, are disagreeing with me about what his true rate of success on these high risk throws are. And I think that might just be kind of an analytical lens thing. So I think that that's the reason. But certainly, yeah, if it doesn't give you pause, I think that you're probably not a very good thinker. And, I'm not going to say I'm the best thinker on the planet, but I at least hope that like when the consensus and I disagree, that I at least take a minute to be like, man, what is up with that? You can still disagree with the consensus and be right, but at least acknowledge that, you're working against the odds there.
Also from Kenneth Allen, what do you think success looks like for the Vikings this season? Obviously, they're not really competitors, so what benchmark should we be looking for them, to meet to judge how the season goes? Obviously, with today's JJ development, that's up in the air, but what else do we look at?
Well, I think that, fielding a defense that is consistently more successful is a big one. And by that, I mean like their success rate from play to play is pretty high, as well as from game to game, relatively speaking. The Vikings ran kind of a gimmick defense last year, which is not to say that they can't use the structure of that defense to inform how this year's defense is going to look. They just can't run the same defense because it got found out, right? And it was unique. And your next step is, now that your defense is figured out, how to make it good again. Zimmer was astoundingly great at that particular thing. Like, ooh, you're running the double A gap blitz on every third down. Well, we'll figure that out. And, well, okay, they did. And then he responded, and then he responded again. And he had one of the greatest defenses in modern NFL history in 2017. Fantastic. Good job, dude. It was good all the way up until 2019. So, that's the real kind of test for Brian Flores. And so we'll see, like, the overall defensive performance might be worse next year than it was last year, but accounting for the kind of talent that they have on defense, and we have to kind of give Flores a little bit of latitude in that regard, how that goes. So, like, it might be more points per game, but if we're seeing more situations where they're doing a pretty good job of denying a 2-minute drill or forcing them into third down or whatever, right? Where it's more consistent and it just doesn't feel like you're riding the knife's edge every friggin' play. That's probably good. Offensively, I think that looking at the offensive line's pass block win rate, seeing how that progresses from year to year, that'll be good because we're worried about the interior. And then also, like, that'll give us some barometer on the front office, like how Sam Darnold does, because they had a lot of opportunities to go after a quarterback. They could have, gone after like Jimmy Garoppolo, right? They had a lot of opportunities, or they could have, drafted a quarterback and decided that guy was going to start, so maybe overpay for Drake May, or they do the same thing and draft JJ McCarthy, but now he starts. And in that scenario, you're probably butterflying, affecting your way out of the injury that occurred. But they had a lot of options, and if Sam Darnold doesn't work out, that's an evaluation for the front office. How effective the running game is, it's almost independent of the quarterback. I think that's a pretty good estimation for how much that offense evolves. How often Justin Jefferson is not doubled would be good. Because, you saw the graph in my Justin Jefferson piece, 33%. He's lapping the field in terms of double team rate. So, yeah. I want to add something. I just always have these random rants in the back of my head. There are some people that thought, and I kind of joked that it was, so I kind of understand why some people might have thought, that the graph that I used for the Justin Jefferson piece, which is the Justin Jefferson contract is bigger than you think it is, and that's cool. In part of that piece, I explained how good he is, and I use a graph about his double team rates. Now, the low end range of that graph is around 10%, and the high end range of that graph is around 40%. JJ is doubled at a 33% rate. Now, because I didn't use the point of zero on the graph, people have suggested that it is a bad faith construction of the graph, and that's insane. All of us learned. I think it was not originally, but it was popularized in a book about lies, damned lies, and statistics, or something like that. Was based off of the Mark Twain quote, right?
That's the quote. Yeah.
Yeah. But there's a book about statistical trickery. And one of the things in the book notes for you to look for is if the graph doesn't start at zero. And people have taken that to mean that any graph that doesn't start at zero is lying to you. And that's wrong. If you're looking at a graph of tax rates over time and you start the graph at zero, all the tax rates are going to seem extremely high. If you take a look at climate change and it starts at, I don't know, absolute zero or Kelvin, 0 Kelvin, that's going to make it look like there's no temperature variation in all of human history. That's a bad graph. It's bad. The range of the graph should encompass the reasonable range of outcomes that you should expect given your data set. Sometimes that ends at zero. Often it doesn't. Zero is just as arbitrary a number as anything else. No wide receiver is doubled at a 0% rate. It is stupid to zero your graph in that situation, because now you are under. What's the opposite of emphasize? De-emphasize. That makes sense. That's how English works. You are de-emphasizing the importance of double team rate in the variation of wide receiver skill and performance. It is a ridiculous thing to do. And in a lot of real world situations, you would never do that. If you were comparing hospitals to each other, you would never have a hospital at a 0% death rate. That's crazy. You should instead have your lowest death rate be a little bit below the lowest death rate that you'd get for a normal hospital in a normal situation. Obviously, there's a lot of hospitals that deal with populations that might have higher incomes or only specialize in certain procedures. And so they'll just have lower death rates because of it. I would exclude those hospitals from the data set. Just like general hospitals in typical environments, you'd be able to compare them against each other, but you wouldn't use zero because that's a ridiculous one to use. And you'd be minimizing the differences between these hospitals, just as an example. It's just not how the world works or how data visualization should work. So I just want to put that out there, unrelated to anything else we've talked about in this episode. Stop assuming that a graph that doesn't start at zero is lying to you. Also, by the way, what do you do in a situation where you have negative numbers in the graph? You morons. It doesn't work like that.
This has been another episode of Arif Goes Off on a Rant that has nothing to do with anything we're speaking of, but is important to him.
Yeah, it's what the podcast is, right?
But basically, as far as I can tell, it's longtime listeners are aware that's kind of how this works. Let's go to Logan Bolsharif, who asks, question for Arif's Olympics Corner, and I believe now it has gone, we're about to go off the rails. You've talked a lot about Simone Biles.
We didn't like 10 minutes ago.
Well, yeah. You've talked a lot about Simone Biles' incredible performance on this and other podcasts. Can you give a tape breakdown of B-Girl Dr. Ray Gunn's performance? Also, provide any truthful information about her and her Australian breaking, because I've seen it. I've seen a lot of it on Twitter, and I don't know how much of it is truthful, but it all seems plausible based upon her performance and quotes since. I do want to point out that somebody had tweeted that she has done in breakdancing what nobody in academia thought was possible: make someone go and like seek out and read somebody's doctoral thesis. Like, that apparently is happening.
I do that all the time. James, what are you talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Rachel Louise Gunn. Her last name is actually Gunn. And her first name's Rachel, so Ray Gunn. By the way, when people first started tweeting about Ray Gunn at the Olympics, I was like, did Chris Ray Gunn, a YouTuber that I kind of hate, get into breakdancing? No. Rachel Louise Gunn, Ray Gunn, is a B-girl. Okay, by the way, there's like this whole thing in breaking culture. You call it breaking, not breakdancing. And it's like one indication that you're not very familiar with the scene is if you constantly refer to breakdancing. Obviously, I'm not familiar with the scene, so I'm changing between breaking and breakdancing. But she's had a lot of experience actually dancing, which I think, if that surprises you, that's extremely fair. I very much sympathize with your surprise there. She's done ballroom dancing, jazz dancing, tap dancing. She's been a competitive ballroom dancer. Like again, this is like, that should not have been the case based on what we saw. It's interesting because like breaking is like a very athletic activity. Like if you take there's like YouTube shorts and TikToks and stuff like that of like gymnasts and breakers like performing very similar moves. And, breakers sometimes struggling to do what the gymnasts do, but like Olympic level gymnasts having a lot of difficulty doing what the breakers do. Like it's like a really difficult activity at the highest level. The highest level includes like Red Bull BC1, I think is the name of the competition. Like they have like international competitions and federations, and like it's like a thing. There's like a reason it got introduced as an Olympic sport instead of just an exhibition at the Olympics. Kind of upsetting that right now there are no plans for it in 2028. Because if you watched the gold medal rounds, that was awesome. That was really good. In fact, the semifinal between I kind of wish I remember their names. The Canadian breaker and the Japanese breaker was incredible. Like there's one moment where the Japanese breaker uses he's got like a classic signature finishing move, and the Canadian dancer like he predicts it and performs it at the exact same time identically. It's such a great own. Because a lot of this culture is based off of like innovation and creativity, and so being so predictable that would happen, that was awesome. So I do kind of hope that it exists in the 2028 Olympics. So, Ray Gunn has competed successfully in Australia for a couple of years. Like she did not qualify to the Olympics because they just picked a random person from Australia. She has successfully won a number of Australian breaking competitions and also competed in World Breaking Championships. She's won her region a couple of times. It's how she made it to the Olympics. And at the Olympics, she sucked. So I have not seen any video of any of her previous competitions. I'm sure it's out there. It's an activity that begs to be videotaped, right? It begs to be filmed, right? So if you have like footage, I mean, somebody has footage of the 2023 championships, the 2022 championships, where she competed, and maybe they have footage of her competing. I would imagine, not that she had success at the world championship level, but she had success at the regional level, right? I would imagine that it looked a lot more impressive than what we saw from her in the Olympics. And please look at, we'll put it in the show notes, but please look it up. It's bad. It's really bad. J. Caspian Kang on Twitter made a first of all, he hates doing the long tweets, but he did it because I think he just felt like it wasn't worth publishing in a piece. So he didn't pitch it to anybody. So he just wrote like a long tweet. And his argument is, maybe she's bad because she's bad. That's always, on the table. But she might have been intentionally bad to make a point for her academic career, which is pretty insulting. Not gonna lie, that's super insulting if that's the case. Her participation, if that is her true skill level, her participation is kind of insulting. Now, some of the breaking judges have come out to defend her. Again, the same breaking judges that did not give her a single point, but have come out to defend her because the goal is to consistently bring originality, right? Like when I mentioned that the Canadian breaker anticipated and performed that Japanese breaker's finishing move, right? At the exact same time, using the exact same angle, extremely funny moment. That was a shot at that guy's originality and also the difficulty of what he was doing, right? And originality is like pretty important. Innovation is really important. So some of the judges have come out and said that like originality is like pretty important. I don't love that. The king, like it feels like there is some distanced irony or some commentary. Again, I don't know that this is the case, so I'm projecting a little bit, but it feels like there is some academic goal for her to perform poorly and create like an imminence, right? Like creating an emotional reaction, and that emotional reaction within it contains some truth worth exploring. And it feels like that is kind of insulting to a culture that erupts from a lot of marginalized and underrepresented and disrespected communities, where it feels like this kind of ironic commentary is premature or inappropriate, and it makes the whole sport look silly. It delegitimizes the whole sport. Like that's the thing that went viral. A lot of people were asking why breaking was at the Olympics because of that. A lot of people said that they would never watch it because of that. Now, I think a lot of them are exaggerating, but I think the point remains that that's the thing that people saw that went viral. And that's the characterization of breaking that people got. And it really sucks because some of the stuff was the final, the gold medal match between Lithuania and Japan in the women's B-girl competition. Holy crap, that was outstanding. Holy crap. And it just feels like there's kind of something kind of awry with Ray Gunn's performance. Now, she is a Deleuzian. So people who are familiar with academic writing know about Deleuze and Guattari and how they draw upon like Lacan and Freud to kind of create a synthesis between psychoanalysis and Marxism. It's kind of complicated stuff. The Deleuze and Guattari's books are written in such a way that you can start reading at any chapter. And I don't recommend that. I just don't recommend reading it. Like I've learned a lot from it. It takes a lot of time to read. It's very annoying. But like there's a lot of emphasis on like sites of resistance to capital and to cultural hegemonies. Some have suggested that, she is making a case against meritocracy in breaking, or how meritocracy is defined in breaking based off of some of the stuff that she's saying in her writings, which would be consistent with somebody who, is Deleuzian and has like a lot of stuff to say about hierarchy. She talks about like lines of flight, which is a pretty consistent theme in that writing, and rhizomatic thought processes, which a rhizome is like ginger is a rhizome. So it's like, it's not a root structure because a rhizome is different in that if you cut a piece off, it also grows. It's a complicated analogy for how ideas work, essentially. But like that creates sites of resistance against capitalism and gender hierarchy and all of that. And it just feels like that's nice. I actually kind of agree with a lot of the stuff that a lot of Deleuzians have said over the years. It just feels like maybe the Olympic breaking competition is not the place for that. I'm sorry. And I know that like wrong form arguments are also rife for criticism. I kind of don't care. This sucked, and I hate it. So
ray gun, stick to sports sort of thing.
Yeah, stick to one of the two. Like when you're breaking,
choose a lane.
When you're writing, right, right. Like you can do both. Just don't cross the streams.
Choose a lane and stay there. Quote from Arif Hassan. Tank B asks, for Arif's romantic period corner, in the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, the titular character upsets the natural order of things when he kills the albatross that he has helped to lead the ship away from the Antarctic waters. For atonement, the mariner is made to wear the slain bird around his neck. If the Vikings were able to made to wear, let's be proper, the birds slain by US Bank Stadium around their neck, would they finally be able to break this curse? The curse has existed before the dead birds. The curse will exist after US Bank Stadium.
Yeah, that's my thought process here. So in the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, the curse is because he killed the albatross, right? The Vikings curse is not because the stadium killed a bunch of birds. They just also happened to kill a bunch of birds. But the curse existed before that.
Yeah, that thing existed at TCF Bank Stadium. Like, that's open air.
Yeah.
We can go back pretty far on that.
I mean, the curse was at the Met. Like, let's be clear.
Yeah.
Like, this goes way back to open air stadiums. So, no, I don't think that if all the Vikings were to be made to wear the birds slain by US Bank Stadium, would they be able to break the curse? They might be able to generate some resistance, as it were, against the curse's force, but they would not be addressing the root cause.
No. Let's go to Room Bull Sharif, who asks, with Arif's gambling problem, why isn't there a code for us non-degenerate gamblers to save money on our first deposits? Also, what's the best code for Arif to use?
Oh my God. Okay, so I don't make it a secret that like I use a lot of these services. I made and then lost a significant amount of money in the Olympics. I came out very slightly ahead thanks to literally the final day of the Olympics. I started winning in swimming and basketball, and I ended up winning because of basketball. Thank you, Asia Wilson and Brianna Stewart. Thank you so much. I won a bunch of money in track and then lost it all, which is great. But until I get paid loads of money, I'm not going to give you... You kidding me? I'm not going to give you a code.
Yeah. You need to subscribe for that sort of thing. Also from Room Bull Sharif, has anyone actually... Let's ask the final question. Has anyone actually seen or bought a live lobster from a grocery store, or are they just things for kids to look at?
So when I was reading this aloud during our show prep, before I finished the question, James was like, I have a story, which is wonderful because when, like, here's a little behind the scenes. When I'm reading like one of these questions, and very often James will hide questions because it's funnier to get my reaction, and, you know, great. That's like what a producer does, right? But like when I'm reading a question so I can research it or do some show prep or whatever, sometimes I'm just like, man, I don't really have anything on this one. I might have an opinion I can generate here, but I'm not feeling it. So when you're reading a question and you get there to like, I don't know how I feel if this is going to be good content, and the other guy comes in with, I have a story. It's one of the greatest feelings on earth. Anyway, James.
So, with that in mind, I'd like to tell you a tale. And
a lobster tale.
As it turns out, yes. Wow. I almost don't want to say it now because I feel like I'm legitimizing that pun. That's rough. So my ex-wife and I were having a conversation back when the marriage was going on, and I mentioned that we had taken, it was during COVID, and my son was wearing a mask, and we went over to the grocery store, and he was staring at the tanks, and he always likes looking at the tanks, and he was trying to convince me that we should get a lobster and have him as a pet. And just a normal conversation for my son and I to have. That's the sort of thing he would want. However, that's when she piped up that when she was a kid, she had a lobster for a week.
A week? What happened?
And I went, I'm sorry, what? It's like, yeah, I named him Ketchup. I was like...
So she's like consistently good at names.
Always. Always,
Yeah.
that is something longtime listeners of the show are aware. Boy, howdy. But it was either Skittles or ketchup. I'm fairly confident it was ketchup. But had this lobster that she kept the like rubber bands on, but just like, and this was not the only time that she had it. She had multiple lobster pets.
Multiple
lobster pets. And would like be playing out in the front yard with the lobster and stuff.
What?
And this was in Thompson, North Dakota.
Playing out in the front yard with the...
Yeah.
What?
This is a thing. And so she's explaining this. And I'm like, I don't know how to handle any of this information. This is astonishing. And we talked briefly about whether or not my son should be allowed to have a lobster for a pet, and we decided against it because he'd be the type that would go, yeah, but this is fun, but I want to see what the claws look like. Let me get the rubber band off.
That would be my primary concern in that scenario. Is like someone being like, hey, it'd be really cool if we got rid of these rubber bands.
Yeah, it's like... So she's telling me this story, and I'm just imagining just like 6 or 8 year old girl just playing out front, playing with her toys, and just picks up her little lobster, and the lobster's legs are moving, and it's just walking around, goes into the tub or whatever, goes into the bathtub for a little while, and yeah, lasts a few days. I don't know if they ate it. I didn't ask. I didn't have the heart to. There are some questions you just don't ask in that sort of situation. But yeah, I was told a tale of multiple lobsters. And I mean, look, I've seen like YouTube kitchen people go out and like, oh, we've got fresh lobster from the store or whatever, like they buy it or whatever. Like you see that sometimes. But the idea of lobster as a pet, apparently, and in at least one household in the state of North Dakota in the 90s, that was a thing.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's where we're at with that. So that's my story of people buying lobsters from the store. So with that, that is going to be the end of this episode of Norse Code. We hope you have enjoyed it. Arif, what do you have to plug?
Yes, I've got my PFF story that a lot of people liked. So I wrote the Draft Network story over the course of like 3-4 months. I wrote the PFF story over the course of like 40 hours. So I'm really happy with how it turned out. I was actually really surprised at the amount of original journalism I could get done, because originally it was just going to be like, hey, here's like a summary of what Front Office Sports and Matthew Collar said. But I was able to get a bunch of people to talk to me, so that was really nice. So those are over at Wide Left. I already mentioned that, I've got the Amana Khalif story over at Wide Left. But yeah, and also the preseason review, which you normally would get top billing in the what is going on at Wide Left. I guess it's fourth now. But yeah, if you want to know how the preseason game went, especially for JJ McCarthy, check that out over at wideleft.football. Otherwise, an explanation of knee injuries, unrelated, and what's going on at PFF. So that's over there too. So check that out.
I don't normally get to plug things, but I do have something to plug at the moment. If you find yourself in the greater Red River Valley area between North Dakota and Minnesota, there is a festival going on in Crookston, Minnesota for the rest of the week, including Sunday. There's a band on Saturday night. There's all sorts of stuff there. There's bouncy houses. There's food trucks, all of that. I say it because I'm running it, and it's my second year of running Crookston Ox Cart Days. So if you find yourself in the area, it's $5 for a button. You get into a whole mess load of events. So, and if you go to the door, if you go to the gate and say that you know James from Norse Code, I'll throw you a free button. How about that? You don't even have to pay to get in, just because I'd like to hear that people know my name. I'm a bit like Arif in that way, actually.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, especially not at a pet store, which is still my favorite Arif fan interaction. I get it in I used to get it in bars. Arif used to get it in pet stores. Brilliant. All right, so for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much, and we'll be back to talk about the game against the Browns next week. So until then, please just try to keep that in the garage next time, and we'll be back soon. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, and wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan of... and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and host, and my name is James McCarthy. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN or at my personal account at Big Mono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can do so in a couple of different ways. You can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there. For $3.50 a month, you get bonus material and more. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode for a one-time donation, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and pick up some Norse Code merch. Any questions or comments that cannot fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this.
Hey, all things are possible through the power of Ben DiNucci.